you and Gilbert went back how long?
More than 4 decades.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you remember how you first got to know one another?
I was enthralled by Gilbert. When I moved to, well, in 1980, I was writing for Rodney Dangerfield, and I think that's about the time that I met him. And when I moved to the city, I was living on 76th and 1st, and Catch was 77th and 1st.
Catch a Rising Star.
Catch a Rising Star. And Gilbert was a regular at Catch a Rising Star. And in one of the pictures that I sent you that they posted on page 6, it has him with a full head of curly hair and me with my 80s porno mustache. And those were the early days that I met him. I used to drive him around. I used to drive him home to make sure he got home safely.
When you saw his act back then, was he someone that you knew was destined for big-time stardom, or was he as funny as 10 other comics that were there?
No, he was always different.
Star?
And for some reason, unique always interested me. You know, I started covering the comedy scene as a comedy journalist and around 1999. But in the early days, I had an eye for talent, I guess. I saw Jerry Seinfeld before he was famous and Paul Reiser when they just started out. And I went up to them to introduce myself and tell them how funny I thought they were. And I actually offered to introduce them to a guy who was managing me at the time. Gilbert was so unique. There's never been anyone like him. There never will be. He always worked with his eyes closed. I think that gave him courage to say things that because he always said such outrageous things.
Right.
But he would say things that, I mean, I never laughed so hard. He would say stuff like, an alien spaceship landed, and I went over to see it, and little green men got out, and one of them said to me, Ben Gazzara is a good actor. Why doesn't he get better parts? And I was like, where did that come from? That's like, he had the most obscure references that was unbelievable. He would come out on stage with a paper napkin. And first, he'd walk out on stage with his eyes closed and his hands out like this, and very awkward. He would fumble with the mic. And for some reason, that made sense to me. I don't know why, but I really understood him. And he would take a paper napkin, and he would tear it into strips, like tentacles, and he would blow through it. And he'd look, a squid. And then he would do 10 minutes of squid jokes. And then he'd be like, no one has more squid material than I do, as if other comedians actually told squid jokes,
It's funny. He was on Saturday Night Live briefly with our friend Joe Piscopo, who people can hear every Sunday night on the Sundays with Sinatra show.
Yeah.
Nobody better than Joe Piscopo. And it's interesting, he didn't really seem to take off when he was a cast member of Saturday Night Live. What do you think it was about his appeal that wasn't necessarily an instant sensation when TV viewers saw it, but clearly he developed enough fans through not only stand-up, but movies and podcast and being the Aflac Duck and a whole bunch of other things that he was able to, to really do well. One of the best-known comics of this generation.
Yeah. He was an acquired taste.
Mm-hmm.
I think in those days he was so new that he hadn't really come into the Gilbert that he became. And from what I understand on SNL, it's up to the writers how many sketches they put you in. If they get you as a character, they write you into a lot more sketches.
I see.
And I think that maybe
the
they
writers
weren't
didn't get
writing him because he was hard to get, because he was so different and so unique. There's nobody ever like that. He wasn't copying. Most comics talk about a lot of the same things. They just get up and they do, maybe it's funny stuff.
Right.
And all,
Could be observational humor, could be insults, could be whatever. But
yeah, but they're regular topics.
Mm-hmm.
Gilbert would come up with squid material. Who's doing squid material? You know what I mean? And his stuff was just so unique and so different. His thoughts, he was a comedic genius.
No doubt about it.
And he had the nerve to do it. A lot of his stuff was so outrageous. I was at the Friars Roast when Shecky Green quit the Friars. He was so offended.
It's funny. Bruce Charrett was here the other day mentioned that same story.
And you know what? I can't remember the joke. I was there. I had interviewed them both. That night it was an event honoring somebody, and Gilbert did this joke, and Shecky got so upset that he tore up his membership.
Wow!
And he stormed out. And so I interviewed him afterwards. I actually brought him on the radio to talk about it, and I can't remember the joke, and it doesn't appear online. I tried to look it up.
I tried to look it up
too. And
Bruce said he couldn't tell it to me on the air, so I'm going to have to get him next time.
It could have been the Aristocrats. his version of the Aristocrats, because very often if he told a joke and it didn't work, he'd go into the Aristocrats, which is so horrible. He said things that I couldn't say if I was home alone. I couldn't say it to myself. That's how embarrassing
That's very
they were.
funny. We're talking with Jeffrey Gurian. You could check out his website at comedymatters.tv. That's comedymatters.tv.
It's comedymatterstv.com.
Oh, excuse me, comedymatterstv.com. I appreciate
that's
that,
okay.
Jeffrey. If you want to call in, if you have a question about anything we're chatting about, you can reach us at 800-848-WABC. Now, all over the world, they have picked up on this story in the New York Post this weekend involving you and Gilbert Gottfried. If people haven't seen this story yet, I'm going to ask you to share it with the audience. Tell us what happened when you took Gilbert to one of the trendiest restaurants here in New York.
Well, it wasn't my choice. I was doing a book called Make 'em Laugh, and it was on the history of the legendary comedy club, The Comic Strip, that was owned by a man named Richie Tinkin, who left us just a year ago in March. And Richie was responsible for the careers of Eddie Murphy. He discovered Chris Rock. Chris wrote the intro to this book, as a matter of fact. And the club opened in 1976. Jerry Seinfeld spent the first 4 years of his career there, from 76 to 80, until he went to L.A. Ray Romano made his career on that stage. Billy Crystal was the first comedian on opening night. George Wallace, Jim Gaffigan, Lisa Lampanelli, Susie Essman. So I interviewed them all for the book. They all came and they sat with me, except Billy Crystal. I went to L.A. to his office in Beverly Hills. The only one that asked to be taken out to lunch was Gilbert. And so he had a reputation for being very frugal. I like to use the word frugal. They called him cheap. But, you know, Susie Essman once told me that she used to ask him if he'd share a cab with her to go from show to show. And he said he'd rather wait for the bus. His idea of a big date was buying a girl a second drink. That was the joke at the time. So everyone knew about Gilbert's frugality. So he insisted that we take him out to lunch. So I called his wife Dara to make sure that he would be there on time, because with Gilbert you never knew. And she was very responsible, and she made sure that he would be ready on time. So Richie and I pick him up, and where does he choose? Pastis, which at the time was the most expensive, the trendiest club restaurant on 14th Street. We take him there. The place is packed. It's so noisy. How are you going to do an interview in a noisy restaurant, right? The three of us are sitting there, and Gilbert starts ordering food off the menu. He's ordering every expense. I think I ordered a burger. He's ordering everything off the menu. He's even asking for things they don't have. And they're like, we're sorry, we don't have that. And Richie's choking because he's paying for everything.
Right.
He paid for parking. He's paying for the food. And Gilbert just keeps ordering. Finally, dessert comes, and I'm like, I have to do the interview because you can't interview people while they're eating. He insists he's never been at the club. After all that, he says, I was never there. He said, I stood in front of the location for years waiting for it to be built, but it never came. He goes, and then I heard it was built. He said, and I heard it had the best electricity of any comedy club in the city, and it had one comfortable chair, and the comedians would take turns sitting in that chair. And he started coming up with this absurd stuff, right? And Richie, I thought he was going to have a heart attack because, like, how am I going to use this in the book on the history of the comic strip? The guy says he was never there. Finally, I get him, he couldn't answer a simple question. Every question he answered with a joke. And for me, it was comedy gold, because my dream, since I met him, was always to riff back and forth with Gilbert Gottfried. Like I did a video with him, asking him if he was in a dance routine. In 2015 at the Just for Laughs Festival, they did a false funeral for him. They thought it was funny to choose a comedian to be waked. And of all people, they chose Gilbert. And so I went to his funeral, his false funeral, and I interviewed him at the time. And he made a big joke that he had to be embalmed. They had to take out all his insides and fill him with sawdust. And, it was
by the way, if people want to check out that book,
it's called Make 'em Laugh.
Make 'em Laugh.
And then there's an updated version called Laughing Legends. It was published by Skyhorse, and it's available on Amazon.
We
but
had
it's
the
got
head
all
of,
these crazy stories.
Skyhorse in here recently. Tony
really?
Lyons, a great guy. I like Tony a
You
lot.
have everybody in
Well,
here.
we
Everybody
try.
comes
We try.
on your show.
It's not everybody's as willing to stay up late as you and Tony are. We're going to continue with Jeffrey Gurian. Let me see that photo real quick. This is you and Gilbert Gottfried
back in 1992.
Now, describe these glasses that he's wearing.
Well, I was commissioned to do a series of futuristic comedy films for Playboy TV. And they had to be funny and they had to be sexy. And so I called friends of mine. I called Richard Belzer. I called Gilbert, Phoebe Legere, and I called Phil Hartman, whose wife wouldn't let him do it because we had to film it in a strip club. The strip club was not open at the time, but just knowing that it was a strip club, she wouldn't let him come. But Gilbert came, and he had to wear these crazy glasses.